I know there are a lot of riders here. There's one I'm somewhat familiar with, and I heard you, Ms. Wasserman Schultz, discuss it in your opening testimony, and that's on the NICS background check system. Can you explain to me what your aversion is to that rider, what your concern is?
Yeah, when you have a veteran who has been referred to a fiduciary to take over their finances, that means that they are actually prohibited by federal law from buying or possessing a gun. And this bill carves out an exception and prevents the VA from referring a veteran who would otherwise not be able, under federal law, to purchase or possess a gun to continue to do so. And that's dangerous to the veteran. We already have a really serious suicide problem, and almost always when a veteran commits suicide, it is because they have a gun. And this bill endangers the lives of veterans and of their loved ones.
So I have actually talked to veterans who've been affected by this rule. It's not a federal law, and so I find it appropriate that we just talked about the power of Congress to appropriate. Now let's talk about the power of Congress to make law, because Congress never made a law that said if you have a fiduciary for your finances, that you now can't own a gun. That's something the liberals over at the VA created during Obama, and it's been going on a long time. I've had whistleblowers call me about this who work in the VA. They actually do these interviews. They talk to the veterans, and typically what happens is a veteran may be 25 or 50% disabled, and they apply for 90% or 100% disability, and they go through an interview. And in that interview, if they make the mistake, when they're asked the question, do you manage your own finances? If they're thinking, well, my wife has the checkbook, if it's a man, and they say that box gets checked, that they do not manage their own finances. That should not be an adjudication of whether somebody should give up their Second Amendment. In fact, not only is that person now added to the Brady list, there can't be a gun in the household. Not only can they not buy a gun, they can't have a gun in the household. So now the spouse is deprived of protection. We're talking about somebody who's 90% disabled, a veteran who was willing to risk their life for this country, and now because somebody in an interview checked a box because they said their wife has the checkbook, now they can't own a gun? This is not due process, and I know this for a fact. I've talked to multiple people that work at the VA who've gone through these interviews. I've talked to veterans. I've talked to veterans' wives who've been through this. And you say there's a process. I see the president's statement on this bill says, oh, there's a process to go through. No, it involves years. It involves lawyers, which most of these folks, if you're applying for disability and you're a veteran on a fixed income, you don't have $20,000 to go pay a lawyer to try to get your rights back because you accidentally, because you were truthful, it wasn't an accident, you just didn't know that telling the person giving you the interview that your wife has the checkbook would put you on the Brady list. Now here's the other reason they don't appeal it. They get that letter that says you've been added to the Brady list at the same time they get their approval for their disability. And the implication, it comes the same day. The implication is if you contest this, you may lose your disability benefit. You were willing to put your life on the line for this country, and now some bureaucrat adjudicated you to not manage your own finances, and then some rule, not a federal law, some rule that the VA came up with says that if you don't manage your own checkbook, now you can't own a gun. It's ridiculous. One of these whistleblowers told me he went to the person's house and the guy's literally trading stocks on his computer. Like, he's not mentally defective. He just admitted that he doesn't have the checkbook. And so this is something that we did, I think we did a CRA on this, but obviously the president was a Democrat at the time, wasn't going to sign it. and also when Trump became president, the clock had run out on this, so you couldn't do a Congressional Review Act on this. And it is long past time to quit taking guns from disabled veterans merely because their wife, or if it's a female, their husband, has the checkbook.
Ms. Massie?
Yes, Ms. Wasserman Schultz. I want to ask you a question first.
Sure.
Do you think that's a fair way to adjudicate this? Do you think if somebody doesn't manage their own finances, they should automatically, without a judge, be put on a list to say they can't have a firearm?
I think you're mischaracterizing the process, first and foremost, because it's not just, oh, I mean, my husband manages our finances, but he is not my...
Don't tell the VA that.
No. I'm happy to tell the VA that because...
They'll take your guns.
Because he's not appointed as my fiduciary. This is a formal adjudication in which a veteran has a fiduciary appointed to manage their finances. That is not a bureaucrat, as you described them, sitting down with a veteran and reviewing, oh, does your wife manage your finances? And they check a box and then suddenly their guns are taken away. That is not how the process works. You have to have a formal adjudication. And beyond that...
Is a judge involved?
Whatever, I'm not familiar with the
A
process.
judge is not involved.
Okay. I'm not 100% sure how a fiduciary is established. I believe it's a judge, but it is not the way you are describing, where they sit down and have an interview and their wife manages their finances and they lose their guns. In addition to that,
Well, let me
there's
interrupt, and then
also
I'll give you more
lengthy
time.
appeals process that allows them, before their guns are taken away from them, they are able to appeal.
You're correct. You did say it's a lengthy appeals process. It's so lengthy it may never end, and it's
lengthy
expensive.
in the sense that it is a rigorous one that makes it hard for the final decision to be that the veteran loses their guns.
I think it's ironic we use the word adjudicate when there's no judge involved. And the administration tried to do the same thing with Social Security. If you had a representative payee, if your Social Security check went to somebody else, they tried to promulgate a rule that said everybody on Social Security that has a representative payee is now going to be thrown into the NICS background check system. Not only does that mean you can't buy a gun when you go fill out your Form 4473 and they run the check on you, it means you are a felon when you sit at home with the guns you already own, or if your spouse has a gun that you can get access to when they're not home, then you're a felon. They tried to do this the thing they're doing at the VA,
This doesn't make them a
they tried to do, oh, really? If you're on the prohibited list, the Brady list,
That's when, if you have a fiduciary appointed for you, that does not make you a felon.
really?
Yes, really.
What about when you get
Meaning
the,
that somebody is responsible for managing your finances.
well, I think you're about to learn something
We have a
here.
rampant suicide problem with
No.
veterans.
What happens
They
is
use their guns,
they,
kill themselves.
no, you just said, you're saying it's not a crime once you're a veteran and you own a gun and you get on that fiduciary list?
No, what I'm saying is that having a fiduciary appointed for you does not make you a felon, and you don't get a fiduciary appointed for you because you're a felon.
That's correct.
There
You
are
don't
three
get a
criteria.
hold on. That's correct. You don't get a fiduciary because you're a felon. But right now,
It's not the
at
only
the
criteria.
at the
in which someone gets
VA,
their guns taken away.
the only criteria is if you get on that fiduciary list, then you get on the Brady list. You get the letter when they approve your benefits. I went through this with
Okay.
at least two people. I'll yield you some time here. Two people that work at the VA that told me this is exactly how it works. I talked to a distraught wife who's been battling this for a couple years to try and get not just her husband, the veterans' guns rights back, but just her right to have a gun in the house. And this is what happens. They don't. It's not an easy process to get off of this. And the veterans typically, as was explained to me by the people that work at the VA, I will call them whistleblowers, the veterans typically don't try to appeal. A lot of them will just try to keep their gun and stay under the radar, illegally keep their gun, because the same day they get the letter that said, we approved you moving from 50% disability to 90 or 100% disability, they get the letter, in fact, it may be in the same envelope, I'm not sure, that says, now you're on the Brady list. You will be a criminal if you have access to a firearm.
Mr. Massey, there are 3 criteria that are used to determine whether somebody is ineligible to purchase a firearm. 1, you have to be a felon. 2, you have to be a domestic violence abuser. And 3, you have to be adjudicated as mentally ill. And one of the ways in which someone has a fiduciary appointed for them is when there is a mental illness. You don't just easily get declared that you are incapable of handling your finances and a fiduciary is appointed for you. There is generally a serious problem in which the veteran needs intervention and a fiduciary is appointed to them, which is aligned with when someone is adjudicated as mentally ill, they are not able to purchase a weapon. And the reason that that is so important to make sure that we leave that in place when it comes to a veteran is so that we don't add to the veteran suicide rate and we don't add to the number of veterans that are killing their own family members or that are engaging in violence with firearms.
What you say can be true, that somebody who is found to be mentally ill is then assigned a fiduciary and then loses their gun rights. But it can also happen that somebody is not found to be mentally ill, that all they have is a fiduciary. They tried to do this exact same thing at the Social Security Administration, and we stopped them here in Congress, I believe with the CRA, Congressional Review Act. But we weren't able to do it at the VA. People who are not mentally ill are being put on the list of people who will be criminals if they keep their guns or try to buy a gun or even have ammunition in the house. And rather than beat a dead horse here, I'm just going to close my comments by saying this is a very needed rider, and I would hope more people would get educated on this, talk to your veterans, talk to somebody who's lost their gun rights, who's not mentally ill, who was simply trying to get their disability because they were willing to put their life on the line for this country, and now they can't even exercise their Second Amendment. So I support that rider, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman.